I opened my front door that Tuesday morning expecting my grocery delivery, but instead found a woman in a crisp navy blazer holding a professional camera and a clipboard. She smiled at me like we were old friends. "Mrs. Patricia Hoffman? I'm Jennifer Clarke from Prestige Realty. I'm here to photograph the property for the listing." My coffee mug nearly slipped from my hands. "I'm sorry, what listing?" Her smile faltered slightly as she glanced at her clipboard. "The listing for this property at 2847, Oakmont Drive. Your son Trevor arranged everything. He said you were expecting me today. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My son Trevor." The name alone made my chest tighten. I hadn't spoken to Trevor in almost 3 weeks, which was unusual because he typically called me every few days. The last time we talked, he'd seemed distracted, asking strange questions about my house insurance and whether I'd updated my estate planning documents. At the time, I'd brushed it off as general concern, the kind any adult child might have about their aging parent. I was 62 years old, a widow of 5 years, living alone in the 4-bedroom house my late husband Daniel and I had bought 37 years ago when Trevor was just a baby. This house held every memory of my marriage, my children's childhoods, countless holidays and birthday celebrations. The thought of listing it, of selling it, had never crossed my mind. Not once. "There must be some mistake," I told Jennifer, gripping the doorframe. "I haven't authorized any listing. This is my home, and I have no intention of selling it." Jennifer's professional smile wavered into genuine confusion. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be emails. "That's strange. I have all the paperwork here. Trevor Hoffman contacted our office 2 weeks ago. He provided documentation showing he has power of attorney and legal authority to manage the property. He said you'd recently been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's and that the family had decided it would be best to transition you into an assisted living facility." The words hit me like a physical blow. Alzheimer's? Assisted living? What was she talking about? "I don't have Alzheimer's," I said, my voice rising. "And my son has no power of attorney over me or my property. I'm perfectly healthy and completely capable of managing my own affairs." Jennifer took a small step back, clearly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding on my doorstep. "Mrs. Hoffman, I'm just doing my job based on the information I was given. Perhaps you should call your son and sort this out? I can reschedule for another time." After she left, I stood in my entryway, my hands shaking so badly I had to set down my coffee mug before I dropped it. I walked to my kitchen table and sat down, trying to process what had just happened. Trevor had contacted a realtor about selling my house. He'd told them he had legal authority over my property. He'd claimed I had Alzheimer's. None of it made any sense. I pulled out my phone and called Trevor's number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Trevor, this is your mother. A realtor just showed up at my door saying you've arranged to list my house. Call me immediately. We need to talk about this." My voice was steadier than I felt. I tried calling again 10 minutes later. Voicemail. And again 20 minutes after that. Voicemail. By the 4th attempt, I was certain he was deliberately avoiding my calls. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, trying to understand what was happening. Trevor was my oldest child, 39 years old, married to a woman named Stephanie whom I'd never particularly warmed to. They had twin daughters, my granddaughters Emma and Sophie, who were 12. Trevor worked in commercial real estate development, a job that had seemed lucrative when he first started, but had apparently hit some rough patches in recent years. He and Stephanie had moved into a larger house 2 years ago, right before the market shifted. I remembered him mentioning something about their mortgage being higher than expected, but he'd assured me everything was fine. My daughter Rachel lived in Seattle with her husband and son. She was 4 years younger than Trevor, and we spoke every Sunday without fail. I decided to call her, needing to talk to someone who might help me make sense of this situation. "Mom? Is everything okay?" Rachel answered on the second ring, immediately picking up on the stress in my voice. "Has Trevor talked to you about anything involving my house?" I asked. There was a pause. "Your house? No, why? What's going on?" I explained about Jennifer the realtor, about Trevor claiming to have power of attorney, about the supposed Alzheimer's diagnosis. Rachel was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Rachel? Are you there? Mom, that's insane. You don't have Alzheimer's. And you definitely haven't given Trevor power of attorney. I would know about something like that. Her voice had gone cold in a way I rarely heard from my usually warm daughter. Have you noticed anything unusual about Trevor lately? Any signs he might be having financial problems? Rachel asked. I thought back over the past few months. Trevor's visits had become more frequent, which I'd initially appreciated. He'd started asking questions about my finances, about my retirement accounts, about the value of the house. He'd mentioned several times that I was living in a house that was too big for one person, that the maintenance must be expensive, that I should consider downsizing. At the time, I thought he was just being practical, showing concern about my ability to manage the property as I got older. Now, those conversations took on a sinister new meaning. He's been asking about my finances, I admitted. And he keeps suggesting I should sell the house and move into something smaller. Mom, I think Trevor is trying to steal your house. Rachel's words hung in the air between us. That's a serious accusation, I said, even though part of me knew she was right. It's a serious situation. A realtor showing up at your door with paperwork claiming Trevor has legal authority over your property? Mom, you need to protect yourself. Right now. After we hung up, with Rachel promising to fly out as soon as she could get time off work, I sat in my kitchen and tried to think clearly. If Trevor was really trying to take my house, he must have created some kind of false documentation. Power of attorney papers would need to be notarized, official. How had he managed that? I walked to my home office, a small room off the living room where I kept my important documents. My filing cabinet was organized the way it had been for years, with folders clearly labeled for taxes, insurance, medical records, and legal documents. I pulled out the legal documents folder and spread the contents across my desk. There were our original house deed, Daniel's will from before he died, my own will that I'd updated 3 years ago, and various other papers. Everything looked normal until I found something that made my blood run cold. At the bottom of the folder was a power of attorney document I'd never seen before. It was dated 6 months ago and appeared to bear my signature, granting Trevor full authority over my financial and property decisions. The signature looked like mine, but I had absolutely no memory of signing such a document. I studied it closely. The notary seal looked official. The legal language seemed legitimate. But I knew with absolute certainty that I had never signed this paper. My hands were shaking as I picked up my phone again. This time I didn't call Trevor. I called my attorney, Gerald Mitchum, who had handled Daniel's estate and my will. His secretary put me through immediately when I said it was urgent. Patricia, what's wrong? Gerald had known me for 15 years and could clearly hear the distress in my voice. I explained everything about the realtor, about the power of attorney document I'd found, about Trevor's claims that I had Alzheimer's. Bring me that document immediately, Gerald said. Don't call Trevor. Don't confront him yet. Just bring me the paperwork and let me examine it. If someone has forged your signature on a legal document, that's fraud. Serious fraud. An hour later, I was sitting in Gerald's office while he examined the power of attorney document through a magnifying glass. He'd already made several phone calls, including one to the notary whose seal appeared on the document. Patricia, the notary has no record of notarizing this document, Gerald said, his face grim. The seal appears to be forged. This entire document is fraudulent. The word hung heavy in the air. Fraudulent. My son had created fake legal documents to steal my house. What do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Gerald leaned back in his chair. First, we file a police report for fraud and forgery. Second, we contact every financial institution where you have accounts and alert them that there's fraudulent power of attorney documentation circulating. Third, we send a cease and desist letter to that real estate agency informing them that any documentation they received from Trevor Hoffman is fraudulent, and that any attempt to list or sell your property will result in legal action. He's my son, I said, and I hated how my voice cracked. I know this is difficult, Patricia, but your son is attempting to commit a serious crime against you. If we don't stop this now, you could lose everything. Over the next few days, I discovered the full scope of Trevor's scheme. Gerald's investigation revealed that Trevor hadn't just contacted one realtor. He'd reached out to 3 different agencies, trying to find one that would move quickly on the listing. He'd created a complete false narrative about my mental decline, even producing what appeared to be medical records showing an Alzheimer's diagnosis from a doctor I'd never heard of. He'd told one realtor that I'd become violent and unpredictable, and that the family was concerned for my safety. Another agency had been told I was in advanced decline, and that we needed to sell quickly before I had to be institutionalized. The medical records were sophisticated forgeries. Gerald had contacted the doctor whose name appeared on them, a neurologist named Dr. Richard Pemberton. Dr. Pemberton confirmed he'd never treated me and had never written any such diagnosis. Someone had stolen his medical license information and created entirely fabricated records. The police detective assigned to my case.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
A woman named Detective Sarah Morales came to my house to take my statement. She was in her mid-40s with short dark hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen too many cases like mine. "Mrs. Hoffman, I need to ask you some difficult questions about your son," she said as we sat in my living room. "Has Trevor been having financial difficulties that you're aware of?" I thought about it carefully. He mentioned some problems with his business about a year ago. He asked me for a loan of $20,000. I gave it to him. Detective Morales made a note. "Did he pay you back?" "No. He said he would, but he hasn't yet." "Have there been other loans?" I felt my face flush with embarrassment. 3 other times in the past 2 years. $15,000, $10,000, and another $20,000. He always said his real estate deals were about to close, and he just needed short-term cash flow help. "That's $65,000 total," Detective Morales said gently. "Mrs. Hoffman, did you know that your son filed for bankruptcy 8 months ago?" The room seemed to tilt. "What?" "Trevor and Stephanie Hoffman filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They're in serious financial trouble. Their house is in foreclosure. They have over $200,000 in debt." I sat there processing this information. My son was bankrupt. His house was being foreclosed. He'd borrowed $65,000 from me that he'd never paid back. And now he was trying to steal my house. "Your house is worth approximately $800,000, Detective Morales continued. "If Trevor could gain control of it through fraudulent power of attorney, he could either sell it and take the proceeds or use it as collateral for loans. Either way, you would lose your home and your primary asset." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we build a case. We have the fraudulent power of attorney document, the fake medical records, evidence of his attempts to list your property without your consent. We'll need to interview the realtors he contacted, the notary whose seal was forged, and anyone else who might have information about his scheme." That evening, Trevor finally returned my calls. I'd made 17 attempts to reach him over 3 days. When my phone rang and his name appeared on the screen, I almost didn't answer. But I needed to hear what he would say. "Mom, sorry I missed your calls. I've been really busy with work." His voice was casual, like nothing unusual had happened. "A realtor showed up at my house, Trevor." Silence on the other end of the line. "She said you'd arranged to list my house, that you had power of attorney over my property, that I had Alzheimer's." More silence. "Trevor, I need you to explain what's going on." When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Gone was the casual tone. Now he sounded defensive, almost angry. "Mom, I was trying to help you. You're getting older and that house is too much for you to handle. I thought it would be easier if I just took care of everything." "Took care of everything?" "You created fraudulent legal documents. You told people I have a disease I don't have. You tried to sell my house without my knowledge or consent. I have your power of attorney, Mom. You signed it 6 months ago. You probably just don't remember because of your condition." The gaslighting was breathtaking. He was actually trying to convince me that I'd signed documents I knew I'd never signed, that I had a medical condition I didn't have. "I've never signed any power of attorney, Trevor. I've had the document examined by my attorney and the police. It's fraudulent. The notary seal is forged. The signature isn't mine." "The police." His voice rose. "You called the police on your own son? You're trying to steal my house, Trevor. What did you expect me to do?" I'm not trying to steal anything. I'm trying to help you. You're clearly not thinking straight if you're involving the police in a family matter. This stopped being a family matter when you committed fraud. I heard Stephanie's voice in the background, sharp and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. Mom, you're making a huge mistake, Trevor said. I'm trying to protect your interests. If you keep living alone in that house, something bad is going to happen. You're going to fall and hurt yourself or forget to turn off the stove and burn the place down. I'm looking out for you. By lying to realtors and creating fake medical records? Those records are real, Mom. You saw Dr. Pemberton 6 months ago. You just don't remember. That's what Alzheimer's does. Dr. Pemberton says he's never treated me. Another long silence. I think we need to have a family meeting about your mental state, Mom. Clearly, you're not well. The only meeting we're going to have is with the police and my attorney. You've committed fraud, Trevor. You've forged legal documents. You've attempted to steal my property. Those are serious crimes. You're really going to do this? You're going to put your own son in jail. You did this to yourself when you decided to try to take everything your father and I worked our entire lives to build. Trevor's voice turned cold. You're going to regret this. He hung up. I sat holding the phone, my whole body trembling. That last statement had sounded like a threat. The next day, Detective Morales called with an update. Mrs. Hoffman, we've discovered something else. Trevor didn't just target your house. He's also attempted to access your retirement accounts and your late husband's life insurance policy. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? He contacted your bank 3 weeks ago using the fraudulent power of attorney and attempted to transfer funds from your retirement account into an account in his name. The bank caught it because the power of attorney document looked suspicious, and they called your attorney of record to verify. Gerald Mitchum told them it was fraudulent and they stopped the transfer. I'd had no idea any of this was happening. How close had I come to losing everything? We've also found that Trevor contacted your insurance company trying to claim he was the beneficiary of your late husband's life insurance policy. They told him the policy had already been paid out years ago, but he was fishing for information about any other policies you might have. This wasn't just about my house. Trevor had been systematically trying to access every asset I had. There's something else you need to know, Detective Morales continued. We interviewed one of the realtors Trevor contacted. She told us that Trevor had discussed with her what kind of assisted living facilities might be appropriate for you. He specifically asked about places that would take patients with advanced dementia who couldn't make their own decisions. The implication was clear. Trevor wasn't just planning to take my house. He was planning to have me institutionalized based on a fake diagnosis so I couldn't fight back. He was going to lock me away, I said, the horror of it washing over me. That appears to have been his plan, yes. That evening, Rachel arrived from Seattle. She'd taken emergency leave from her job and left her husband to manage things at home so she could be with me. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, I broke down completely. She held me while I cried, all the fear and betrayal and anger pouring out of me. How could he do this? I kept asking. How could my own son do this to me? Rachel had no answers. She was dealing with her own shock at discovering what her brother had become. Over the next few weeks, the full picture emerged. Trevor had started planning this scheme almost a year ago, right around the time he'd filed for bankruptcy. He'd begun by asking me for those loans, testing whether I'd give him money. When I did, he realized I might be an easy target. He'd started visiting more frequently, asking questions about my finances, my health, my daily routine. He'd been gathering information, building his case. The medical records had been created by someone Trevor knew, another real estate developer who'd gotten into legal trouble before for fraud. The power of attorney had been forged using software that could replicate signatures. The notary seal had been purchased illegally online. Every piece of his scheme had been carefully planned and executed. What Trevor hadn't counted on was Jennifer the realtor showing up at my door when I was home and alert, instead of on one of the days when I was out or distracted. He hadn't expected me to immediately call my attorney and the police. He thought he could move fast enough that by the time I realized what was happening, it would be too late. He'd underestimated me. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Trevor had hired an attorney who was trying to argue that this was all a misunderstanding, That Trevor had genuinely believed I'd signed the power of attorney, and that I was suffering from memory issues. The defense strategy seemed to be painting Trevor as a concerned son who'd made mistakes trying to help his mother, rather than a criminal who'd attempted to steal everything I owned. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The forged documents, the fake medical records, the multiple attempts to access my accounts, the conversations with realtors where he'd explicitly discussed having me institutionalized. Rachel sat with me in court the day Trevor appeared for his arraignment. It was the first time I'd seen him since before all this started, and I barely recognized the man standing before the judge. He looked smaller, somehow diminished. He didn't look at me once. The judge set bail at $50,000, which Stephanie apparently paid using money from her parents. Trevor was released but ordered to have no contact with me. The trial was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, I worked with Gerald to protect myself. We changed all my passwords, notified every financial institution, updated my will to explicitly exclude Trevor, and put safeguards in place to prevent any future attempts at fraud. I also started seeing a therapist to process the emotional trauma of discovering that my own son had tried to destroy my life for money. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. This was the child I'd raised, the baby I'd nursed, the little boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged. I'd helped him with homework, attended his sports games, paid for his college education. I'd loved him unconditionally for 39 years. And he'd repaid that love by trying to rob me of everything. Rachel helped me understand that I needed to grieve not just the betrayal but also the loss of the son I thought I had. The Trevor I'd loved didn't exist anymore if he ever had. This man who'd forged documents and created fake medical records to steal from his own mother was someone I didn't know. Maybe he was always capable of this, Rachel said one evening as we sat together in my living room. Maybe we just never saw it because he never needed to do something like this before. Or maybe desperation changed him, I replied. Maybe he looked at his bankruptcy and his foreclosure and saw me as a solution rather than as his mother. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. My son had become my enemy, and I had to protect myself from him even though doing so broke my heart. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence showing Trevor's systematic attempt to defraud me. Realtors testified about his conversations with them. The notary whose seal had been forged testified. Dr. Pemberton testified that the medical records were fake. Gerald testified about the fraudulent power of attorney. The man who'd created the fake medical records had been arrested separately and agreed to testify against Trevor in exchange for a reduced sentence. He described in detail how Trevor had paid him $5,000 to create documentation showing I had advanced Alzheimer's disease. Trevor's defense attorney tried to argue that Trevor had genuinely believed I was mentally declining, that he'd been acting in what he thought were my best interests. But the evidence contradicted that narrative at every turn. Text messages between Trevor and Stephanie, recovered from their phones, showed them discussing exactly how much money they could get from selling my house and how they planned to split the proceeds. In one particularly damning message, Trevor had written to Stephanie telling her to stop worrying, because the old lady won't know what hit her until it's too late. Reading those words in court, knowing my son had written them about me, was one of the hardest moments of my life. I testified about the fake power of attorney, about Trevor's multiple requests for loans, about the realtor showing up at my door. I explained that I'd never had any symptoms of Alzheimer's, had never seen Dr. Pemberton, had never signed any power of attorney giving Trevor control over my property. The defense tried to suggest that I might have forgotten signing the documents due to memory problems, but medical examinations ordered by the court had shown I had no cognitive impairment whatsoever. I was mentally sharp, fully competent, and had been systematically targeted by my own son. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts including fraud, forgery, attempted theft, and elder abuse. Trevor's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. I almost didn't go, but Rachel convinced me I needed to see it through. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up on shaking legs and faced my son for the first time during the entire trial. Trevor, I began, my voice steady despite the tears running down my face. I gave you life. I raised you with love and care. I supported your dreams and believed in your potential. When you needed help, I gave you $65,000 without hesitation because you were my son and I trusted you. Trevor stared at the table in front of him, refusing to meet my eyes. You repaid that trust and love by trying to steal everything your father and I worked our entire lives to build. You created fake medical records saying I had a disease I don't have. You planned to have me institutionalized so I couldn't fight back while you sold my home out from under me. You told strangers I was violent and unpredictable to justify removing me from my own life. I want the court to understand something. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, sustained campaign to destroy your own mother for financial gain. You didn't just try to steal my house. You tried to steal my identity, my dignity, my freedom. You tried to erase me. The courtroom was completely silent except for my voice. I will never forgive you for this. Not because I'm cruel, but because what you did is unforgivable. You didn't just betray me. You showed me that everything I believed about who you were was a lie. The son I loved wouldn't have done this. And I have to accept that maybe that son never existed. When I sat down, I felt Rachel's hand squeeze mine. The judge thanked me for my statement and then addressed Trevor directly. Mr. Hoffman, I've presided over many cases of financial fraud in my career, but few as calculated and cruel as this one. You targeted your own mother, a woman who had shown you nothing but love and generosity. You created an elaborate scheme to strip her of everything she had, including her freedom. The court sentences you to 7 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. You are also ordered to pay full restitution of all money you borrowed from your mother, and all costs associated with defending herself against your fraud. 7 years. Trevor would be 46 years old when he got out of prison. Emma and Sophie, my granddaughters, would be 19. I'd lost a son, but they'd lost their father to his own greed. Stephanie filed for divorce within 2 weeks of the sentencing. She claimed she'd had no idea what Trevor was doing, though the text messages suggested otherwise. I never saw her again. She moved with the girls to another state, and I didn't try to contact them. They needed to rebuild their lives away from the scandal and shame. I focused on rebuilding my own life. The house that Trevor had tried to steal became my sanctuary again. I redecorated rooms, painted walls, made it completely mine in a way it hadn't been since Daniel died. I joined a book club at the local library, started volunteering at a women's shelter, and reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. Rachel visited more often, bringing her family. My grandson called me every week to check on me. I even started dating again, something I never thought I'd do. His name was Robert, a retired teacher who'd lost his wife to cancer several years ago. We met at the library and bonded over our love of mystery novels. He knew about Trevor and what had happened. Instead of treating me like a victim, he treated me like a survivor. We took things slowly, but there was comfort in companionship after so much betrayal. A year after Trevor's sentencing, I received a letter from him. It was the first communication we'd had since the trial. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was typed, not handwritten, and was surprisingly short. Mom, I know you probably won't believe this, but I'm sorry. I was desperate and I made terrible choices. I convinced myself I was doing what was necessary for my family, but I know now that's not true. I was just being selfish and greedy. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I understand what I did to you was unforgivable. I destroyed our relationship for money I never even got. That will be my burden to carry for the rest of my life. I hope you're doing well and that you're happy. You deserve to be happy. Trevor. I read the letter 3 times, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. But it seemed genuine, or as genuine as anything Trevor said could be at this point. I showed it to my therapist during our next session. How does it make you feel? She asked. Sad, I admitted. Just infinitely sad. Because even if he means it, even if he's genuinely sorry, it doesn't change what he did. It doesn't repair the damage. Some things can't be fixed. Are you going to write back? I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond to maintain some tiny thread of connection to my son. But a larger part of me knew that thread had been severed permanently the moment he forged my signature on that power of attorney document. No, I finally said. I don't think I will. He said he doesn't expect forgiveness, and he's right not to. This letter is for him, not for me. It's his way of trying to feel better about what he did. But I don't need to participate in his emotional rehabilitation. I never wrote back. I kept the letter in a drawer, but I didn't respond. 6 months later, I received another letter, but this one wasn't from Trevor. It was from Emma, my granddaughter. She was 13 now and her handwriting was careful and neat. Dear Grandma Patricia, Mom says I'm not supposed to write to you, but I wanted you to know that I miss you. Sophie misses you too. We don't really understand what Dad did, but Mom says it was really bad and that's why he's in prison. I'm sorry he hurt you. I hope maybe someday we can see you again. I remember you used to make the best chocolate chip cookies. Love, Emma. The letter made me cry for an hour straight. These innocent children caught in the crossfire of their father's crimes. Rachel helped me craft a response that I sent through my attorney to make sure it was legally appropriate, given the circumstances. I told Emma and Sophie that I loved them, that what their father did wasn't their fault, and that when they were older and could make their own choices about contact, my door would always be open to them. I didn't know if they'd ever take me up on that offer, but I wanted them to know it existed. 2 years after Trevor's sentencing, I was sitting on my back porch watching the sunset when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Hoffman? This is Jennifer Clarke from Prestige Realty. My heart stopped. Jennifer, the realtor who'd shown up at my door that morning 2 years ago and set this entire nightmare in motion. I know this is unexpected, Jennifer continued quickly, and I completely understand if you hang up on me. But I wanted to call and apologize. What happened with your son, what he put you through, it's been weighing on me. I should have verified his claims more thoroughly before showing up at your house. You were doing your job, I said, surprised by my own response. You had documentation that looked legitimate. You couldn't have known it was all fake. Still, I feel terrible about my role in it. I've actually changed how our agency handles situations involving elderly clients and adult children claiming power of attorney. We now require additional verification and always insist on speaking directly to the property owner. I wish I'd done that with you. We talked for a few more minutes. Jennifer had followed the case in the news and had felt guilty about her part in it ever since. I told her she shouldn't, that she'd actually helped me by showing up when she did rather than later when Trevor's plan was more advanced. After we hung up, I thought about the chain of events that had started with Jennifer's unexpected appearance at my door. If she'd come even a week later, Trevor might have succeeded in getting my house listed. If she'd accepted his documentation without question and moved forward, I might not have caught it until it was too late. In a strange way, her showing up that morning had saved me. I'd gone from being someone whose son was trying to steal her life to someone who'd fought back and won. I'd protected my home, my assets, and my dignity. I'd proven that I was strong and capable, and not someone who could be easily victimized. Now, at 64 years old, I was living my best life. The house that Trevor had coveted was mine, truly mine in a way it hadn't been before. Every room held new memories now, not just the old ones from when Daniel was alive or when my children were young. I hosted book club meetings here. Robert and I cooked elaborate dinners in my kitchen. Rachel and her family visited and filled the space with laughter. Trevor had tried to take this from me and failed. His attempt to steal my home had inadvertently forced me to reclaim my life in ways I might never have done otherwise. I'd found my voice, my strength, my willingness to fight for myself, even when that meant fighting against my own child. The other day, I was working in my garden when my neighbor stopped by to chat. She mentioned seeing a news story about elder financial abuse and how common it was becoming. I just can't imagine, she said, shaking her head. How could someone do that to their own parent? I could have told her I didn't have to imagine because I'd lived it. Instead, I just smiled and said, some people lose their way. But the important thing is not letting them take you down with them. That evening, I sat on my back porch again, watching another sunset over the yard I'd tended for 37 years. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel checking in, asking how I was doing. I replied with a simple message. I'm good. Really truly good. And I meant it. Trevor had tried to steal my house, my money, my freedom, and my identity. He'd created elaborate lies and forged documents. He'd planned to have me locked away in a facility, declared incompetent and forgotten. But he'd failed. I was still here, still in my home, still living my life on my terms. The realtor had shown up at my door that Tuesday morning expecting to photograph a house for sale. Instead, she triggered a chain of events that led to justice, protection, and ultimately, my liberation from a son who'd seen me as nothing more than a means to solve his financial problems. I raised my glass of wine in a silent toast to the sunset, to survival, to the strength I discovered I had when I needed it most. Trevor was serving his sentence in prison. I was serving myself a life well lived. And in the end, that was the best possible outcome. The house was still mine. The life was still mine. And no one, not even my own child, could take that away from me. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. I was worth fighting for, and I was strong enough to fight. The months following Trevor's sentencing brought an unexpected kind of peace to my life, though it was a peace built on the ashes of a relationship I'd thought was unbreakable. I kept myself busy, filling my days with activities and people who reminded me that the world still held goodness and trust. But there were moments, usually late at night when the house was quiet, that the full weight of what had happened would crash over me like a wave. My son had looked at me and seen nothing but dollar signs. He'd calculated the value of my life in square footage and retirement account balances. That knowledge sat in my chest like a stone that never quite dissolved. Robert became a steady presence during those difficult months. We'd progress from coffee dates at the library to dinners at my house, from cautious friendship to something that felt like genuine companionship. He never pushed me to talk about Trevor if I wasn't ready, but he listened without judgment when I needed to process my feelings. One evening, about 3 months after the trial ended, he asked me a question that had clearly been on his mind for some time. We were sitting in my living room, the same room where I'd sat with Detective Morales learning the extent of Trevor's betrayal, but now it felt different. Lighter somehow. "Patricia," Robert said carefully, setting down his wine glass, "have you thought about what you'll do when Trevor gets out? It's years away, but it will come eventually." I'd been avoiding that thought, pushing it to the back of my mind whenever it tried to surface. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe that 7 years in prison will change him, that he'll come out genuinely remorseful and maybe we could have some kind of relationship again. But a larger part of me knows that's probably wishful thinking." Robert nodded. "My sister went through something similar with her daughter. Not exactly the same, but financial betrayal within the family. She struggled with that same question. Should she forgive? Could she trust again? What did she decide?" I asked. "She decided that forgiveness and trust are two different things. She forgave her daughter eventually, because holding on to the anger was hurting her more than it was hurting anyone else. But she never trusted her again. They have a relationship now, but it's bounded, supervised. My sister protects herself." It was good advice, practical and honest. But I wasn't sure I was even at the forgiveness stage yet. Some days I was still angry enough that if Trevor had been standing in front of me, I didn't know what I'd say to him. Rachel called me every Sunday like clockwork, and we'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. She was struggling with her own feelings about Trevor, caught between loyalty to her brother and horror at what he'd done to me. "I keep thinking about all the times we were kids together," she told me one Sunday afternoon. "Trevor was always competitive, always had to win at everything. But I never thought he was capable of something like this. Was I just blind?" I'd asked myself the same question countless times. Had there been signs I'd missed? Red flags I'd ignored because I didn't want to see them? Looking back, I could identify moments that might have been warnings. Trevor's tendency to bend the truth when it suited him. The way he'd occasionally manipulated situations to get what he wanted. His sometimes casual cruelty towards Stephanie when he thought no one was listening. But hindsight gave everything a sinister cast it hadn't had at the time. "I think we see what we want to see when it comes to people we love," I told Rachel. And Trevor was very good at showing us the version of himself he wanted us to believe in. "Do you think he ever really loved us?" Rachel asked, her voice small. "Or were we always just useful to him?" That question haunted me. I wanted to believe that the little boy I'd raised, the child who'd crawled into my lap for comfort and hugged me goodbye on his first day of school, had been real. That somewhere inside the man who'd forged my signature and planned my institutionalization was a person who'd once genuinely loved his mother. But I honestly didn't know anymore. For months after the trial, I received a call from Detective Morales. My stomach clenched when I saw her name on my phone screen. What could she possibly need to tell me now? Mrs. Hoffman, I wanted to give you a heads up about something, she said. We've been investigating the individual who helped Trevor create the fake medical records. During that investigation, we discovered he's been involved in similar schemes with other clients. My heart sank. How many others? At least a dozen that we've identified so far. Mostly adult children targeting elderly parents. The schemes vary, but the core is always the same. Fraudulent documentation to gain control of assets. I felt sick. Trevor hadn't even been original in his cruelty. He'd bought a service, a how-to kit for stealing from your own parents. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because the prosecution is building a much larger case, and they may need you to testify again. Not about Trevor specifically, but about the broader pattern of elder abuse these schemes enable. Your case was particularly well documented, which makes it valuable for demonstrating how these frauds work. The thought of going through another trial made me exhausted, but I understood the importance. If my testimony could help protect other people from what I'd gone through, I had an obligation to do it. Of course I'll testify, I said. Whatever you need. A week later I got a different kind of call. This one was from Stephanie's mother, a woman I'd met only a handful of times over the years. Her name was Margaret, and she'd always struck me as somewhat cold and judgmental. Patricia, this is Margaret Lawson. I hope you don't mind me calling. I minded very much actually, but I was curious about what she wanted. What can I do for you, Margaret? I wanted to apologize for my daughter's role in what happened to you. I know Stephanie claims she didn't know what Trevor was planning, but I found some things when I was helping her pack up the house after the foreclosure. Text messages between her and Trevor that suggest she knew more than she admitted. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of text messages? Discussions about how much your house might sell for. Questions about whether you had any other assets Trevor hadn't mentioned. Stephanie asking if Trevor was sure the plan would work without you finding out. So Stephanie had been in on it. The divorce and her claims of innocence had been just another layer of deception. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because my daughter is a liar and a thief, and she's using my money to live comfortably while pretending to be a victim. She took those girls away claiming she needed to protect them from the scandal, but really she just wanted to avoid any legal consequences for her own actions. I'm ashamed of her. The bitterness in Margaret's voice was sharp and painful. I recognized it because I felt the same way about Trevor. Have you given this information to the police? I asked. I'm planning to. I wanted to talk to you first to let you know it's coming. Stephanie might face charges of her own. After we hung up, I sat with this new information. Stephanie had known. She'd been part of it. The woman who'd sat at my dinner table, who I'd given birthday gifts to, who called me Mom, had helped plan my destruction. I called Gerald Mitchum and told him about Margaret's call. He sighed heavily. I suspected as much, but without proof there wasn't much we could do. If she's willing to turn over those messages, the prosecutor will likely charge Stephanie as an accomplice. What does that mean for the girls? I asked. Emma and Sophie shouldn't have to pay for their parents' crimes more than they already had. That's complicated. Margaret has been helping with their care, but if Stephanie goes to prison too, there will need to be a more permanent arrangement. Do you want me to look into what your rights might be as their grandmother? Did I? Part of me wanted to step in, to give those girls the stability their parents had destroyed. But another part of me was terrified of bringing any piece of Trevor and Stephanie's toxicity back into my life. Let me think about it, I said. That evening I talked it over with Robert. We were in my kitchen, and he was helping me prepare dinner in the easy, comfortable way we developed over months of spending time together. Those girls are innocent in all this, Robert said as he chopped vegetables. But you need to protect yourself too. Taking them in could mean ongoing contact with their parents, at least eventually. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't sure I was. I keep thinking about Emma's letter, I said. How she said she missed me. She's just a child caught up in something she didn't create and can't control. You could be involved in their lives without taking on full custody, Robert suggested. Maybe supervised visits, staying connected while maintaining healthy boundaries. It was a compromise that made sense. I could be their grandmother without sacrificing my own peace and security. I called Gerald back the next day and asked him to explore limited visitation rights. 2 weeks later, Margaret called again. The police have the messages, she said. They're charging Stephanie as an accomplice. She's furious with me, says I've destroyed her life. But I told her she destroyed her own life when she decided to help rob an elderly woman. How are Emma and Sophie handling all of this? I asked. They're confused and angry. Stephanie has been filling their heads with lies about you, saying you're vindictive and that you put their father in prison out of spite. I've been trying to correct those lies, but it's hard when their mother is the one telling them. My heart ached for those girls. Not only had they lost their father to prison, but now they were losing their mother too and being fed a twisted version of reality that made me the villain. I'd like to see them, I said. If you think that would be appropriate. Margaret was quiet for a moment. I think they need to hear the truth from you. Not my version of it or Stephanie's version of it. Yours. Would you be willing to talk to them to explain what really happened? It would be one of the hardest conversations of my life, but those girls deserved honesty. Yes, I said. I'll talk to them. The meeting was arranged for a Saturday afternoon at Margaret's house. She thought neutral territory would be better than either my house or anywhere associated with Trevor and Stephanie. I was so nervous the morning of the meeting that I couldn't eat breakfast. Rachel had flown in to be with me, insisting I shouldn't have to face this alone. You don't owe those kids anything, Mom, Rachel said as she drove us to Margaret's house. If this is too hard, we can leave at any time. I know, I said. But they deserve the truth. And maybe I need this too. Need to face them and explain what their father did. It might help with my own healing. Margaret's house was a neat colonial in a quiet suburb about 40 minutes from mine. When she opened the door, I could see the strain on her face. This situation had aged her, carved lines of stress and disappointment into her features. Emma and Sophie were sitting on the couch in the living room, two mirror images with their father's dark hair and their mother's green eyes. They were 13 now, on the cusp of adolescence, and they looked at me with expressions of distrust and confusion. Girls, this is your grandmother Patricia, Margaret said gently. She'd like to talk to you about what happened with your dad. I sat down in the chair across from them, very aware of the physical and emotional distance between us. Rachel stood near the doorway, ready to support me if I needed it. I know your mother has probably told you things about me, I began, deciding honesty was the only path forward. And I know you're probably angry and confused about why your dad is in prison. I want to tell you the truth about what happened, and then you can decide for yourselves what you think about me. Emma, the slightly older twin by 7 minutes, spoke first. Mom says you put Dad in jail because you're mean and you wanted to punish him for trying to help you. I took a deep breath. Your dad didn't try to help me. He tried to steal from me. He created fake documents with my signature on them that said he could control my money and my house. He told people I had Alzheimer's disease, which I don't have, and he planned to have me put in a facility so he could sell my house without me stopping him. Sophie's eyes widened. But why would he do that? Because he needed money, I said simply. Your parents were having serious financial problems. They owed a lot of people a lot of money, and they were about to lose your house. Your dad thought if he could take my house and my money, he could solve his problems. But you're his mom, Emma said, and there were tears in her eyes now. He wouldn't do that to his own mom. I didn't think he would either, I said softly. I loved your dad very much. I gave him money when he asked for it. I trusted him completely. And he used that trust to try to take everything from me. Rachel moved closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. The girls were processing this information, and I could see the moment when it started to make sense to them, when the pieces of their father's behavior and their family's sudden collapse began to fit together in a new pattern. Mom knew about it, Sophie said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said, because they deserved that truth too. Your mom knew what your dad was planning. She helped him. That's why she's being charged now too. Emma started crying. So both our parents are going to prison? Your mother's trial hasn't happened yet, Margaret interjected. We don't know what will happen. But yes, she might go to prison too. The girls sat there on the couch, their whole world crumbling around them, and my heart broke for them. They hadn't chosen their parents. They hadn't asked for any of this. I want you both to know something important, I said. None of this is your fault. What your parents did was wrong, and they're facing consequences for their actions. But that has nothing to do with you. You're good kids caught in a terrible situation. Do you hate us? Sophie asked, her voice small. Because of what our parents did? No, I said firmly. I could never hate you. You're my granddaughters and I love you. What your parents did hurt me very badly, but that wasn't your doing. If you want to have a relationship with me, I'd like that very much. But I understand if you need time to think about it. The meeting lasted about an hour. We talked about happier memories from when they were younger, before everything fell apart. I told them stories about their father as a little boy, the good memories, because they deserved to know that he hadn't always been the person who'd betrayed his own mother. When it was time to leave, Emma hugged me. It was tentative and brief, but it was something. Sophie held back, still processing, still uncertain. Can we think about it? Emma asked. About seeing you again? Of course, I said. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. On the drive home, Rachel and I were both quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, that was one of the hardest things I've ever watched you do. I had to, I said. Those girls needed to hear the truth from me. They needed to know they're not responsible for their parents' choices. Do you think you'll see them again? I thought about Emma's hug, about the way both girls had looked at me by the end of the conversation with something less like distrust and more like cautious hope. Yes, I said. I think eventually, yes. Stephanie's trial happened 4 months later. Unlike Trevor's trial, I wasn't required to testify much. The text messages Margaret had provided, along with other evidence, painted a clear picture of Stephanie's involvement. She'd known about the fraudulent power of attorney. She'd helped Trevor calculate how much my assets were worth. She'd encouraged him to move faster when it seemed like I might be getting suspicious. The prosecution portrayed her as an equal partner in the scheme, not an innocent bystander. Her attorney tried to argue that she'd been under Trevor's influence, that he'd manipulated her into going along with his plans. But the text messages contradicted that narrative. In several of them, Stephanie was the one pushing for more aggressive action, worried that Trevor was moving too slowly. The jury found her guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. Her sentence was shorter than Trevor's, 4 years in prison followed by probation, partly because she played a supporting role rather than being the primary architect of the scheme. But it was still prison time, which meant Emma and Sophie would now have both parents incarcerated. Margaret was granted temporary custody of the girls, with provisions for me to have supervised visitation rights. The first official visit was arranged for 2 weeks after Stephanie's sentencing. We met at a family center that specialized in supervised visits for complicated family situations. A social worker was present to observe and ensure everything went smoothly. Emma and Sophie seemed older than they had just a few months ago. Maybe it was the weight of everything they'd been through, or maybe it was just the natural progression of adolescence accelerated by trauma. We spent the visit playing board games and talking about school, carefully avoiding the topic of their parents. At the end of the 2 hours, both girls hugged me, and this time Sophie's hug was as genuine as Emma's. Can we do this again? Emma asked. As often as you want, I said. Over the following months, our visits became regular. Once a week at first, then twice a week as everyone became more comfortable. The girls started opening up about their feelings, their fears, their anger at their parents for what they'd done. I listened and tried to be a steady, honest presence in their chaotic lives. Robert came to some of the visits, and the girls took to him immediately. He had a gentle way with them, treating them like the young adults they were becoming rather than like broken children who needed to be handled delicately. 6 months into our regular visits, Margaret called me with a proposal. The girls have been asking if they can spend more time with you, she said. And honestly, I think it would be good for all of you. Would you be interested in having them stay with you some weekends? The thought thrilled and terrified me in equal measure. Having Emma and Sophie in my house, sleeping in the bedrooms that had once belonged to their father and aunt, felt loaded with symbolism and potential complications. But I wanted a real relationship with them, and that required more than supervised visits at a family center. Yes, I said. I'd like that very much. The first weekend they stayed with me was awkward. We were all trying too hard, too conscious of the significance of this moment. Emma and Sophie were staying in the same house their father had tried to steal, sleeping under a roof he'd planned to sell out from under me. But by Sunday morning, when we were making pancakes together in my kitchen and Sophie was laughing at something Robert said, it started to feel natural. We established a routine. Every other weekend, the girls would stay with me. We'd cook together, watch movies, work on their homework, and slowly, carefully, build a relationship that wasn't defined by their parents' betrayal. They never asked to visit Trevor or Stephanie in prison, and I didn't push them. That was a decision they'd need to make on their own when they were ready. Meanwhile, my life continued to heal and grow in unexpected ways. The support group for elder abuse survivors that I'd started attending became an important part of my routine. Hearing other people's stories, realizing I wasn't alone in what I'd experienced, helped me process my own trauma. I met a woman named Dorothy who was 73 and had been defrauded by her grandson. She'd lost her house and most of her savings before the scheme was discovered. Unlike me, she hadn't been able to recover what was taken from her. But I got something back that's more valuable than money, Dorothy told me during one session. I got myself back. My strength, my voice, my refusal to be a victim. That's worth more than any house. Her words resonated with me. Yes, I'd been fortunate to catch Trevor's scheme before he succeeded in taking everything. But the real victory was in how I'd responded, in my refusal to be diminished or defined by what he'd tried to do to me. A year after Stephanie's sentencing, I received an unexpected letter. This one wasn't from Trevor or Emma or anyone I might have anticipated. It was from Jennifer Clarke, the realtor who'd shown up at my door that fateful morning and inadvertently saved me from Trevor's scheme. Dear Mrs. Hoffman, the letter began, I hope this letter finds you well. I've thought about you often over the past year and a half, wondering how you were doing after everything that happened. I wanted to let you know that your case has had a real impact on how our industry handles situations involving elderly clients and power of attorney claims. Jennifer went on to explain that she developed a training program for realtors about recognizing potential elder abuse situations. She presented it at industry conferences and had received interest from agencies across the country. Your courage in prosecuting your son and speaking publicly about what happened has helped protect countless other elderly people from similar schemes, she wrote. I know that probably doesn't make what you went through any easier, but I wanted you to know that something positive has come from your terrible experience. I wrote back thanking her for the letter and for turning a traumatic situation into an opportunity to help others. It felt good to know that my suffering hadn't been meaningless, that other people might be spared because I'd been willing to stand up and fight. Robert and I got engaged on a quiet evening in my backyard, almost 2 years after we'd first met at the library. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture, just a simple question asked in a moment of perfect clarity. We'd been talking about the future, about aging and companionship, and what we wanted the next chapter of our lives to look like. We should just get married, Robert said. And it wasn't really a question but more of a gentle suggestion. We should, I agreed, and that was that. We had a small ceremony in my backyard with Rachel and her family, Robert's children and grandchildren, and Emma and Sophie as junior bridesmaids. Margaret came too, having become an unlikely friend through our shared connection to the girls and our shared disappointment in our children. Trevor and Stephanie were both still in prison and weren't mentioned during the ceremony. This was a celebration of new beginnings, not a reminder of past betrayals. Emma gave a short speech at the reception that made everyone cry. Grandma Patricia taught me that family isn't just about blood, she said. It's about the people who show up for you, who tell you the truth even when it's hard, who love you without trying to use you. She's my real family, and I'm so happy she's found someone who knows how amazing she is. After the wedding, Robert moved into my house. We talked about selling it and buying something new together, something that wouldn't have any associations with Trevor's betrayal. But in the end, I couldn't let Trevor win by driving me out of the home I loved. Instead, we remodeled and redecorated, making it truly ours in a way that honored my history while creating space for our future. The house that Trevor tried to steal became a home filled with love and laughter and second chances. Rachel visited often with her family. Emma and Sophie stayed with us every other weekend, and during summer breaks they'd spend weeks at a time. Robert's grandchildren came for holidays. We hosted book club meetings and dinner parties and filled the space with life. 3 years into Trevor's sentence, I received a call from the prison. He'd requested that I be added to his approved visitor list. I stared at the form they sent me, Trevor's signature requesting my presence, and felt nothing but emptiness. "You don't have to go," Robert said when I told him about the request. "You don't owe him anything." "I know," I said. "But maybe I need to see him. Not for his sake but for mine. To see if there's anything left of the son I once knew. Or if that person is truly gone forever." Rachel flew out to go with me. We made the 2-hour drive to the state prison on a gray Thursday morning, neither of us talking much. The prison was exactly as depressing as I'd imagined. Concrete walls, barbed wire fences, the dead-eyed expressions of people who'd given up hope. We went through security, surrendering our phones and personal belongings, and were led to a visiting room that smelled like industrial cleaner in desperation. Trevor was already sitting at one of the tables when we arrived. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, with new lines around his eyes and gray threading through his hair. He was 39 years old but looked 50. When he saw us, something crossed his face. Relief maybe, or fear, or some combination of the two. "Mom," he said, half standing. "Rachel. Thank you for coming." We sat down across from him. The table between us felt like an ocean. "You asked to see me," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Why?" Trevor looked down at his hands. They were clasped together on the table, and I noticed he'd lost his wedding ring. Stephanie had probably sold it. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "Really apologize, not like in that letter I sent before. I've been doing therapy here, working through why I did what I did. And I wanted you to know that I understand now how badly I betrayed you." "Do you?" I asked. "Do you really understand what you tried to do to me?" His eyes met mine, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something that might have been genuine remorse. "You were my mother. You gave me life, raised me, loved me unconditionally. And I looked at you and saw nothing but a means to an end. I tried to steal your home, your money, your freedom, your dignity. I planned to have you locked away so you couldn't stop me. I don't know if there's a word for how terrible that is." "There is," Rachel said coldly. "Evil. The word is evil." Trevor flinched. "Yeah, I guess it is. Why did you do it?" I asked. It was the question that had haunted me for 3 years. "Why did you think it was okay to destroy your own mother?" "Because I was desperate," Trevor said. "We were drowning in debt. The business was failing. We were about to lose everything. And all I could think was that you had all this money just sitting there, this house you didn't really need. It seemed unfair that you had so much while we were struggling. So you decided to just take it," I said. "Not ask for help. Not have an honest conversation about your problems. Just forge documents and lie and plan to have me institutionalized." "I know how it sounds," Trevor said. "I know there's no excuse. I tried to tell myself I was doing what I had to do for my family, but really I was just being selfish and cruel. I convinced myself you wouldn't really be hurt because you wouldn't understand what was happening. That's how I justified it, by dehumanizing you in my own mind." The honesty was startling. I'd expected excuses, justifications, more lies. Instead, he was laying out the full ugliness of his thinking. "Where is this coming from?" Rachel asked suspiciously. "This sudden clarity? Are you trying to manipulate Mom into advocating for early release or something?" "No," Trevor said. "I'm not eligible for parole for another 2 years anyway. This isn't about that. It's about finally taking responsibility for what I did. My therapist says I need to face the people I hurt and acknowledge the harm I caused without expecting forgiveness or absolution." "Your therapist is right," I said. "Because I don't forgive you, Trevor. I don't know if I ever will." He nodded. "I understand. I don't deserve forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I did. I see you as a person, as my mother, as someone who loved me and trusted me. And I destroyed that. I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I did that." We sat in silence for a moment. The visiting room buzzed with other conversations, other families dealing with their own traumas and betrayals. "The girls are doing well," I finally said. "They're living with Stephanie's mother, but they stay with me and my husband every other weekend." Something passed over Trevor's face. Pain maybe, or loss. "My husband. I remarried 2 years ago. His name is Robert and he's a good man. The girls like him very much. I'm glad you found someone," Trevor said, and he sounded like he meant it. You deserve to be happy. Do Emma and Sophie ask about me? No, I said honestly. They don't ask about you or Stephanie. They're focused on building their own lives, on healing from what you two did to them. I've destroyed my daughter's childhood, Trevor said, his voice breaking. They're going to grow up without their parents because I was too greedy and too stupid to find another way. Yes, I said. You did that. And they'll carry that damage with them for the rest of their lives. That's on you. Rachel leaned forward. I need to know something, Trevor. Did you ever really love any of us? Or were we always just useful to you? Trevor looked at his sister, tears running down his face now. I loved you. I loved Mom. I loved my daughters. But I let greed and desperation override that love. I made choices that were incompatible with love. I don't know if that means the love wasn't real, or if it just means I'm someone who's capable of betraying the people he loves. Either way, I failed you all. The visit lasted 45 minutes. Toward the end, Trevor asked, Is there any chance years from now when I get out that we could have some kind of relationship again? Even a small one? I thought about it carefully. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe. But it would be on my terms with boundaries in place. And it would depend on whether you continue this work of understanding what you did and why. I'm not interested in a relationship with someone who's just saying what they think I want to hear. Fair enough, Trevor said. As Rachel and I drove home that afternoon, I felt strange. Not better exactly, but different. Something had shifted in seeing Trevor face what he'd done without excuses. Do you believe him? Rachel asked. About understanding what he did. I think I do, I said. But understanding doesn't equal forgiveness. And it definitely doesn't equal trust. He can spend the rest of his life understanding what he did to me, and that still won't repair what he broke. Are you glad you went? Yes, I said. Because now I know for certain that I'm not the one who failed. He did. And that clarity matters. When I got home, Robert was in the kitchen preparing dinner. He hugged me without saying anything, just held me until I was ready to talk. Emma and Sophie were coming for the weekend the next day, and I spent the evening preparing their rooms and thinking about family. The family I'd been born into, the family I'd created, and the family I'd chosen. Trevor had tried to destroy me because he'd seen me as an obstacle rather than a person. But in doing so, he'd inadvertently forced me to rediscover my own strength. I'd fought for myself when I needed to. I'd protected my assets and my dignity. I'd refused to be diminished by his betrayal. And in the process, I'd built a new life that was richer and fuller than the one I'd had before. A life with Robert, with Emma and Sophie, with Rachel and her family, with friends who'd stood by me and new connections I'd made through my advocacy work. The house that Trevor tried to steal had become a symbol of survival and resilience. Every room held new memories now. Better memories. The kitchen where I'd confronted him was now where Robert and I cooked meals together. The living room where Detective Morales had outlined his crimes was now where we hosted book club and game nights. The bedroom where I'd cried myself to sleep during the worst of it was now where I woke up each morning next to someone who loved me honestly. 4 years after Trevor's sentencing, Emma and Sophie turned 17. They were applying to colleges and thinking about their futures. Both of them had flourished despite, or perhaps because of, the trauma they'd experienced. They were strong, independent young women who understood the importance of integrity and honesty, in a way many people never learned. I want to study social work, Emma told me one evening while we were cooking dinner together. I want to help families that are going through what we went through. Maybe work with at-risk youth or family services. That's wonderful, I said, feeling proud of this resilient girl who transformed her pain into purpose. Sophie was leaning toward law. I want to prosecute people who hurt elderly people, she said. Like Dad and Mom did to you. I want to make sure they face consequences. They'd both chosen careers that reflected what they'd learned from their parents' crimes. Not bitterness or cynicism, but a commitment to protecting others and seeking justice. Margaret and I had become genuine friends through our shared role in raising the girls. We met for lunch once a month. Two women bound together by our children's betrayals and our determination not to let those betrayals define us. Sometimes I wonder where I went wrong with Stephanie, Margaret said during one of these lunches. What I could have done differently to raise a daughter who wouldn't help rob an elderly woman. I ask myself the same thing about Trevor. I admitted. But I'm starting to think that maybe we didn't fail them. They failed themselves. We gave them values and morals and examples of how to live with integrity. They chose to ignore all of that. Still, Margaret said, it's hard not to feel responsible. It is, I agreed. But we can't let their failures be our burden to carry. We did our best. They made their choices. Now we're dealing with the consequences and trying to make something good come out of something terrible. The girls had been given the opportunity to write victim impact statements for Stephanie's parole hearing, which was coming up after she'd served 3.5 years of her 4-year sentence. Both Emma and Sophie declined. I don't want to help her get out early, but I don't want to keep her in longer either, Emma explained. I just want to move on with my life without thinking about her. Sophie nodded in agreement. We're doing fine without her. We have Grandma Margaret and Grandma Patricia and Robert. We don't need parents who see us as nothing but complications to their schemes. Their maturity and clarity impressed me. At 17, they understood boundaries and self-protection in ways that had taken me decades to learn. Stephanie was released on parole 6 months before her full sentence was up. According to Margaret, she moved to another state and had minimal contact with the girls. They spoke on the phone occasionally, brief and stilted conversations that neither Emma nor Sophie looked forward to. She keeps acting like she's the victim in all this, Sophie told me after one such call. Like she's the one who was wrong because we're not falling all over ourselves to welcome her back into our lives. How does that make you feel? I asked. Mostly just annoyed, Sophie said. She had a chance to be our mom, to be honest and real. She chose money and lies instead. That was her choice, and she doesn't get to be mad at us for protecting ourselves from her. Trevor's parole hearing was scheduled for 6 months after Stephanie's release. He'd served 4 years of his 7-year sentence and was petitioning for early release based on good behavior and completion of therapy programs. The parole board contacted me asking if I wanted to make a statement. I thought about it for weeks. Part of me wanted to argue against his release, to keep him locked away for as long as possible. But another part of me recognized that keeping him in prison wouldn't heal me or undo what he'd done. In the end, I decided to speak at the hearing. Robert came with me, as did Rachel. Emma and Sophie asked if they should come, but I told them it was up to them. They decided to write statements that I could read on their behalf instead. The parole hearing room was smaller and less formal than the courtroom where Trevor had been sentenced. Trevor sat at a table with his attorney, and he looked markedly different than he had during my prison visit. He'd gained back some weight, and there was something in his posture that suggested genuine change rather than performance. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and addressed the parole board while Trevor sat listening. 4 years ago, my son tried to steal everything I had. He forged documents, created fake medical records, and planned to have me institutionalized so he could sell my house and take my money. The betrayal was comprehensive and devastating. It forced me to face that the person I'd loved and trusted my entire life was capable of tremendous cruelty. I paused, looking directly at Trevor. But over these past 4 years, I've rebuilt my life. I've remarried. I've developed a relationship with my granddaughters that has been one of the great joys of my later years. I've turned my experience into advocacy work that's helped protect other elderly people from similar schemes. In short, I've survived and thrived despite what Trevor tried to do to me. I visited Trevor in prison a year ago, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Genuine remorse. Real understanding of what he'd done. I don't know if that change is permanent or if it's deep enough to prevent him from hurting people again. But I do know that keeping him in prison for the next 3 years won't change what happened to me. It won't give me back the trust one lost or the relationship we once had. I took a deep breath. I'm not here to argue for or against Trevor's release. I'm here to tell you that whatever you decide, I'll be fine. He doesn't have power over me anymore. He can't hurt me anymore because I've protected myself and built a life that doesn't depend on him being locked away. So make your decision based on whether you think he's genuinely changed and whether releasing him serves society's interests. Don't make it based on protecting me because I've learned to protect myself. After I sat down, Emma and Sophie's statements were read. Both were remarkably mature and balanced, expressing hurt at their father's actions, but also acknowledging that they'd moved forward with their lives. Our dad made terrible choices that hurt a lot of people, Emma had written. We don't excuse those choices, But we also recognize that keeping him in prison longer won't undo the damage. We want him to have a chance to continue working on becoming a better person, but we also want the parole board to know that we're doing fine without him. We have good people in our lives who show us what real love and integrity look like. Trevor was granted parole with strict conditions. He'd be released in 3 months, required to attend ongoing therapy, forbidden from contacting me or trying to access any of my financial information, and required to maintain employment and housing. Any violation would send him back to prison to serve his remaining sentence. I felt surprisingly neutral about the decision. Trevor's freedom or incarceration didn't really affect my life anymore. I'd moved on in every meaningful way. The week before Trevor's release, he sent me one final letter from prison. "Mom, I don't expect anything from you when I get out. No relationship, no forgiveness, no contact unless you initiate it. I just wanted you to know that the therapy and work I've done in here is real. I understand now what I did to you, and I understand that understanding doesn't erase it. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be someone worthy of the second chance I've been given. Not to earn your forgiveness because I don't deserve it, but because it's the right thing to do. Thank you for your statement at the parole hearing. Knowing that you've survived and built a good life despite what I did to you is the only thing that makes this bearable. I destroyed our relationship, but I didn't destroy you. That matters. Trevor." I showed the letter to Robert and Rachel. "What do you think?" Rachel asked. "Is he genuine?" "I think he might be," I said. "But it doesn't really matter to me anymore. He can be genuine and reformed, and I still don't need him in my life. Some betrayals are too deep to come back from." On the day Trevor was released from prison, I was having lunch with the girls and helping Sophie work on her college application essays. We didn't mention it, didn't mark the occasion in any way. It was just another day in our lives. Lives that had moved forward without him. 6 months after his release, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a check for $65,000 with a note that said simply, "First installment on what I owe you." Trevor had gotten a job and was paying me back. I deposited the check and put the money in a trust fund for Emma and Sophie's college education. They need it more than I did. Over the following year, similar checks arrived every few months. Trevor was working as a property manager, living modestly, and using every spare dollar to repay what he'd stolen from me. He never asked to see me, never tried to push for contact beyond these silent gestures of restitution. Emma turned 18 and asked if she could visit her father. Sophie had no interest, but Emma felt she needed closure. I offered to go with her, but she wanted to do it alone. "I need to see who he is now," she explained. "Not to forgive him or rebuild our relationship, but to face him as an adult and decide for myself how I feel about him." She came back from that meeting quiet and thoughtful. "He's different," she told me. "Smaller. Sadder. He's working hard and doing therapy and really trying to be better. But I don't know if I want him in my life. I don't know if I can trust him." "You don't have to decide right now," I told her. "Take your time. Figure out what's right for you, not what you think anyone else wants you to do." Sophie had no interest in seeing either of her parents. "They made their choices," she said. "I don't hate them, but I don't need them either. I have family that actually shows up for me." Emma did see Trevor occasionally after that first meeting. Brief visits, always in public places, slowly trying to build something from the ruins of their relationship. I supported her choice while also making clear that it didn't affect my own boundaries with Trevor. 5 years after Trevor's sentencing, Rachel and I were having coffee in my kitchen when she asked me something she'd clearly been thinking about for a while. "Do you ever regret pressing charges? Making all of this public? It's impacted the whole family, especially the girls." I thought about it carefully. "No," I said. "I don't regret it. Trevor committed a crime. A serious, calculated crime against his own mother. If I'd stayed silent, if I'd tried to handle it privately, what would that have taught Emma and Sophie? That family loyalty means accepting abuse? That you should protect people who hurt you because sharing blood is more important than justice. By prosecuting Trevor, I showed those girls that their worth and dignity matter more than preserving some false image of family harmony. I showed them that you can love someone and still hold them accountable. I showed them that being someone's mother doesn't mean being their doormat or their victim. Rachel nodded slowly. The girls have turned out remarkably well, considering everything. They have, I agreed. Because they learned early that real love doesn't look like what their parents gave them. Real love means honesty and boundaries and protecting yourself when necessary. On what would have been Daniel's 70th birthday, I visited his grave. I did this every year, bringing flowers and sitting on the bench nearby, talking to him in my head about what had happened since he'd been gone. I think you'd be proud of how I handled this, I told him silently. I fought back. I protected our home, our life's work. And I'm happy now, really happy. I found Robert, who treats me the way you did, with respect and partnership. I'm sorry Trevor turned out the way he did. I know that would break your heart. But Emma and Sophie are wonderful. And they remind me of you sometimes in the best ways. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and I felt that familiar sense of peace that came from these visits. Daniel had been gone for 10 years now, and I'd lived an entire lifetime since his death. A lifetime that included betrayal and heartbreak, but also survival and triumph and new love. Emma and Sophie graduated from high school that spring, both with honors. Their graduation party was held at my house, with Robert and Rachel and Margaret and all the people who'd supported them through their journey. Stephanie came, standing awkwardly at the edge of things, clearly unsure of her place in these girls' lives. Trevor was invited but didn't come. He sent a card to each girl with a check for their college expenses and a note congratulating them. Emma seemed touched by the gesture. Sophie threw her card away without reading it. Both responses were valid. That summer, before the girls left for college, we took a trip together. Just the three of us, a grandmother-granddaughter's adventure to celebrate their new chapter. We went to the Grand Canyon, something I'd always wanted to see but had never made time for. Standing on the edge of that vast natural wonder with these two strong, brilliant young women, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Trevor had tried to destroy me, but in fighting back, I'd discovered strengths I didn't know I had. I'd built new relationships and deepened existing ones. I'd turned my pain into purpose through my advocacy work. And most importantly, I'd shown Emma and Sophie what resilience looked like, what refusing to be a victim meant. Thank you for fighting for yourself, Emma said to me as we watched the sunset over the canyon. Because in fighting for yourself, you fought for us too. You showed us that we matter, that we're worth protecting. You are worth protecting, I told them both. Always. And now you know how to protect yourselves, which is the most important lesson anyone can learn. We stood there together, 3 generations of women who'd survived betrayal and found strength in each other. The house that a realtor had once come to photograph for a fraudulent listing was still mine, but it had become so much more than just property. It was a symbol of survival, a testament to the fact that you can be hurt by the people you love most and still rebuild something beautiful. Trevor had seen it as nothing but a means to solve his financial problems. I saw it as home, as sanctuary, as the place where I discovered I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Years from now, when Emma and Sophie had children of their own, I hope they'd tell them this story. Not as a tale of family dysfunction, but as a story of a woman who refused to disappear, who fought for herself when she had to, who rebuilt her life from the ashes of betrayal. I was 68 years old now, remarried and happy, with granddaughters I adored and a life rich with purpose and connection. The woman Trevor had tried to institutionalize and rob was long gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't compromise it for anyone. Not for family loyalty, not for social expectations, not for the comfort of keeping ugly truths hidden. The realtor who'd shown up at my door 5 years ago had thought she was coming to photograph a house for sale. Instead, she triggered a chain of events that led to justice, healing, and ultimately liberation. Every ending is really a beginning if you're brave enough to see it that way. Trevor had tried to end my life as I knew it, but instead he'd given me the chance to begin again, stronger and more certain of who I was and what I deserved. And that, I realized, was the best revenge possible. Not anger or bitterness, but happiness and peace and a life well lived despite everything he tried to take from me. 10 years after that morning when Jennifer Clarke appeared at my door, I stood in the same spot watching Emma help her own daughter out of the car. My great-granddaughter Lily was 3 years old, with dark curls and Trevor's eyes, though Emma never mentioned the resemblance. Time had a strange way of softening some edges while sharpening others. Trevor had been out of prison for 6 years now, living quietly in another state, working steadily, and maintaining the boundaries I'd established. We'd spoken exactly twice in those 6 years, brief phone calls on holidays that Emma had facilitated. The conversations were polite, distant, like talking to a stranger who happened to share my last name. Sophie had become a prosecutor specializing in elder abuse cases, just as she'd planned. She'd put away dozens of people who tried to do to their parents what Trevor had done to me. She called me after every conviction, her voice tight with satisfaction. She'd never reconciled with her father, had legally changed her last name, and lived her life as though he'd never existed. Emma had chosen a different path, allowing Trevor supervised visits with Lily once every few months. She'd forgiven him in her own way, though she never forgot what he'd done. The difference between her response and Sophie's reminded me that healing wasn't universal, that each person had to find their own way through betrayal. Robert had passed away 2 years ago after a short battle with cancer. We'd had 8 beautiful years together, years filled with the kind of partnership I'd once thought I'd never find again. His death had been hard, but not devastating. I'd learned by then that I could survive loss, that I was stronger than any grief that came my way. The house still stood, the house Trevor had tried to steal, though it looked different now. I'd had it painted a cheerful yellow, had renovated the kitchen, had turned Daniel's old office into a craft room where I made quilts for my growing collection of great-grandchildren. Every change I made felt like an act of reclamation, a way of saying this space was mine to shape however I wanted. Margaret and I still had lunch once a month, 2 women in our 70s now, bonded by the complicated legacy of our children's choices. Stephanie had moved to Florida and worked as a hotel manager, sending occasional cards to the girls but never pushing for more than they were willing to give. Rachel visited every few months, and we'd sit on my back porch talking about everything and nothing. She'd become a grandmother herself, her own life full and rich. We rarely talked about Trevor anymore unless Emma brought him up. He'd become a footnote in our family story rather than the central character he'd once been. The advocacy work I'd started years ago had grown into something bigger than I'd imagined. I spoke at conferences about elder abuse prevention, trained social workers and medical professionals on recognizing the warning signs, and lobbied for stronger legal protections. My testimony had helped pass legislation that made it harder for people to exploit their aging parents. Every time I spoke publicly about what Trevor had done, I felt the same mix of pain and purpose. The story never got easier to tell, but telling it mattered. It helped people, protected people. It gave meaning to suffering that could have destroyed me. Detective Morales had retired from the police force but stayed in touch. She'd tell me about cases she'd worked where my story had helped investigators recognize patterns of fraud they might have otherwise missed. The ripple effects of that morning when Jennifer showed up at my door had reached further than I could have imagined. I'd learned something important through all of this. Betrayal by someone you love doesn't have to define your entire life. It can be one chapter in a much longer story, a painful chapter certainly, but not the only one that matters. I'd been victimized, but I refused to remain a victim. That distinction made all the difference. Emma brought Lily inside, and the little girl ran to me with her arms outstretched. I scooped her up, breathing in that particular smell of childhood, all shampoo and innocence. This child would grow up hearing the story of what her grandfather had tried to do, but she'd also grow up seeing how her great-grandmother had survived it, had built something beautiful from the wreckage. The lessons we pass down aren't always the ones we plan. Sometimes the most important things we teach are taught through survival, through the example of refusing to surrender to circumstances that seem insurmountable. I thought about the woman I'd been 10 years ago, confused and frightened when that realtor appeared at my door, not yet understanding the scope of what her own son had planned. That woman had been forced to find strength she didn't know she possessed, to fight battles she'd never imagined facing, to make choices between love and self-protection. I didn't miss her exactly, that more innocent version of myself who trusted completely and never imagined her own child could betray her so thoroughly. But I honored her, the woman who'd taken the first steps toward fighting back, who'd called her attorney and the police instead of trying to hide the ugly truth. The house around me held all our stories now. Trevor's betrayal, yes, but also my survival. Robert's love. Emma and Sophie's resilience. Rachel's unwavering support. The laughter of great-grandchildren who were growing up knowing that family meant honesty and boundaries, not blind loyalty that enabled harm. As Lily played with toys in the living room where I'd once sat with Detective Morales learning the full scope of Trevor's crimes, I felt something close to peace. Not the naive peace of never having been hurt, but the hard-won peace of someone who'd been through fire and come out stronger. The realtor who'd shown up at my door that Tuesday morning had inadvertently saved my life by triggering the discovery of Trevor's scheme before it was too late. Sometimes our salvation comes from unexpected places, from the very events that seem at first like disasters. I'd spent the decade since then building a life that reflected who I truly was, not who I'd thought I was supposed to be. A woman who valued herself enough to fight for her own interests. A woman who understood that love without respect was worthless. A woman who knew her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. Trevor's attempt to steal my house had failed, but in the process, he'd given me something unexpected. The chance to discover my own strength. The opportunity to show my granddaughters what resilience looked like. The motivation to turn private pain into public advocacy that helped countless others. If someone had told me on that terrible morning 10 years ago that I'd eventually be grateful for the experience, I'd have thought they were insane. But gratitude wasn't about being glad it happened. It was about recognizing how I'd grown through surviving it, how I'd become someone I was proud to be. Emma settled onto the couch beside me, and we watched Lily play. My daughter didn't ask if I wanted to hear about her latest visit with Trevor. She'd learned over the years to keep those worlds separate unless I specifically asked. That was another lesson we'd all learned. You could love multiple people who didn't love each other. You could maintain separate relationships without forcing everyone into uncomfortable proximity. Boundaries were acts of love, not betrayal. The afternoon sun streamed through my windows, the same windows Trevor had probably calculated the value of when he was planning to sell my house. But they were my windows in my house filled with my light and my life. I'd won this battle not through revenge or bitterness, but through simple persistence in living well. The best response to someone trying to erase you was to live so fully, so authentically, so joyfully that their attempt seemed pathetic in retrospect. Margaret called to confirm our lunch date for the following week. We'd been doing this for a decade now. Two mothers who'd raised children capable of terrible things, supporting each other through the complicated aftermath. Her voice on the phone was warm and familiar, the voice of someone who understood without needing explanations. That understanding was its own kind of gift. Sophie sent a text with a photo from court. Another conviction in an elder abuse case. Another family protected from what mine had endured. She'd taken her anger at her parents and transformed it into purpose. I couldn't have been prouder of who she'd become. Rachel called that evening after Emma had taken Lily home. We talked for an hour about nothing important, just the comfortable conversation of people who'd been through hell together and come out the other side. She didn't ask how I was doing with all the old memories. She knew by now that I was fine, that the memories had lost their power to wound me. They were just facts now, things that had happened, not active sources of pain. Before bed, I walked through my house turning off lights, touching familiar objects that held years of memories. The dining room table where I'd confronted Trevor about the realtor. The kitchen where I'd made coffee the morning I collapsed from his poisoning attempts. Wait, that was someone else's story. My kitchen where I'd made countless meals for the people I loved. Every room had been reclaimed, transformed from spaces where bad things happened into spaces where good things lived. I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the neighborhood I'd lived in for 40 years. This house that Trevor had tried to steal had become my greatest triumph. Not because of its monetary value but because of what keeping it represented. I'd fought for myself when I needed to. I'd refused to be diminished or destroyed. I built a life worth living on my own terms. The woman who'd opened her door to find a realtor with a camera 10 years ago had been afraid and confused. The woman standing at this window now was neither of those things. She was strong, certain, surrounded by love, and absolutely clear about her own worth. Tomorrow would bring another day of this beautiful, hard-won life. More time with family who'd earned their place in my world. More work advocating for people facing what I'd faced. More ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because I'd fought so hard to keep them. Trevor had tried to take everything from me. Instead, he'd forced me to claim everything for myself. And that made all the difference. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.